Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can all see and hear me okay. Welcome to this mini live lesson on Gaelic and climate justice. So this afternoon, we have our fantastic Gaelic Education and Learning Officer, Catriona Mullholland, and she's going to be taking you through this session on Gaelic and climate justice. So I'll hand straight over to you, Catriona.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming today. It's Misha Catriona. My name is Catriona, and today I want to talk to you about Gaelic and how that links to climate justice. So hopefully today I'll be able to answer the following questions for you. What is the Gaelic language and where is it spoken? What is the connection between language and climate change? And why should we all care about languages? But before I get started, I just want to ask everyone who's here, how many of you speak Gaelic? If you speak Gaelic, maybe put your hand up just to remind your teacher, and they'll add it into the chat so we can see how many Gaelic speakers we have with us. And if you don't speak Gaelic yourself, do you know anyone who speaks Gaelic? Let your teacher know, and then if the teachers would put in the chat box whether we have Gaelic speakers here and how many of us know Gaelic speakers. Great, so one class has one fluent speaker and the rest of the class is learning Gaelic, so that's great to hear. We have another classroom full of Gaelic speakers, the whole class. That's brilliant. Someone has said that they've got two who can say a little in Gaelic and two others who know fluent Gaelic speakers, but maybe most people don't speak any Gaelic. So it's a real mix, and it probably depends on where you are, because different parts of the country have a lot more Gaelic speakers than others. But before we begin, I want us all to learn just a few words of Gaelic. So some of you already know these words. The first one is fáilte. So who can tell us what fáilte means? Some of you, if you don't speak Gaelic, you might have still seen or heard this word, fáilte. So fáilte means welcome. Great. And so I want us all to practice saying the word fáilte. So I'm going to count to 3, and then we're all going to say it together. Are you up for that? And you won't be alone because my colleague Nicola is also going to say it with us. And so we're all going to practice saying fáilte, meaning welcome. Okay? 1, 2, 3, fáilte.
Fáilte.
Well done, everyone. And here's another phrase. Who knows what tap alive means? Tap alive. So for those of you that don't speak Gaelic, it might sound a bit different than what you're expecting. The first word has a DH on the end that you don't say. So the first word is tapa. And then the second word has this BH, which in Gaelic often sounds like a V sound. So you get live, tapa live. And tap alive means thank you. So will we all say tap alive together after 3? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Tap
Tap
alive.
alive.
Well done, everyone. So now we all know a few words of Gaelic, as well as our fluent speakers and our learners that know a lot more. And so before we get started, I just want to know, what do you know about Gaelic? Some of you probably know lots about Gaelic, and some of you might not have heard much about it at all. And what do you know about Scots? And can you think of any connections between Gaelic and Scots? What comes to mind when I talk about these languages? So I want you to discuss this in class for 1 minute. And then when a timer is fully appeared on the screen, I want teachers to share their answers so I know what you've been talking about. Okay, so if teachers would share the kind of things that came up in the chat box, that would be great. Okay, so one class has said that they recognise Scots words more than they recognise Gaelic words. And that's actually a really interesting point. And the reason for that is because Scots and English are both part of the same language family. They both have the same sort of roots. A long time ago, there was a language called Proto-Germanic that was spoken in near kind of where modern day Germany is, as well as parts of Sweden and Norway. And from that language, lots of people started speaking differently, moving to different places, meeting other people that spoke other languages. And lots of today's modern European languages all came from that one language called Proto-Germanic. And that's where we get English and Scots, as well as languages like Dutch and Swedish and modern day German. And so that means that these languages have much more in common with each other than languages from a different language family. So we also have Celtic languages, and Gaelic is a Celtic language. So Gaelic is actually much more similar to Irish than it is to Scots. And we have other Celtic languages such as Welsh and Cornish. And Scots and Gaelic are both Scotland's indigenous languages. So the word indigenous is used to describe something that comes from a particular place. So we talk about indigenous peoples that still live in the land that their people have lived in for a very long time. We talk about indigenous plants because lots of plants have moved across the world with people bringing them to new places, but they're indigenous to a certain part of the world. And we call Scots and Gaelic our indigenous languages because they were formed in Scotland over thousands of years of Scottish people communicating to each other. And there are some Gaelic speakers in other parts of the world, like Nova Scotia in Canada, for example. But the language is indigenous to Scotland because this is where it originally comes from. But both Scots and Gaelic have influenced Scottish culture. So we're now just going to play a quick quiz to see whether you know where some popular aspects of Scottish culture originally come from Gaelic culture or from Scots culture. So first of all, ceilidhs. When people get together and have a dance, does this part of our culture come from Scots culture or from Gaelic culture? Let your teachers know what you think and share it in the chat box. So lots of people are saying Gaelic, and that's correct, because ceilidh is actually a Gaelic word, meaning to gather together or to visit people. And actually in Gaelic culture, a ceilidh is a little bit different from what we usually do in the rest of Scotland. So a ceilidh in Gaelic culture, it doesn't necessarily mean a dance. It might mean people getting together and sharing Gaelic songs, sharing Gaelic poetry, sharing stories. And so it's actually changed as it's become a bigger part of Scottish culture. And Gaelic speakers actually do ceilidhs quite differently. What about Burns Night? Does Burns Night come from Scots culture or from Gaelic culture? What do we think? Okay, I've got lots of people saying Scots culture, and that's correct because we celebrate the Scots poet Robert Burns, who wrote in the language Scots. Now, what about kilts? Does this come from Scots culture or Gaelic culture? Okay, I've got someone saying Scots. What do other schools think? Lots of people saying Scots. Well, it's a Scots word. Kilt means to tuck something, but it actually comes from Gaelic culture. It was Gaels, people who speak Gaelic, that wore the kilts first, and then later it became a part of wider Scottish culture. So we're going to learn a bit more about Gaelic in Scotland. Today, about 57,000 people speak Gaelic in Scotland. And this map shows us that most people who speak Gaelic live in the Western Isles, these dark green islands up here. In these communities, more than half of people will speak Gaelic. And then as the green becomes lighter, less and less people speak Gaelic. So in this very pale light green areas, less than 1% of people speak Gaelic. So it's very different in different parts of the country. But not many people know that Gaelic actually used to be spoken almost everywhere in Scotland. And one of the ways we know this is from place names. Because some parts of Scotland haven't spoken Gaelic in a very long time, maybe about 1,000 years. But we know that they used to speak Gaelic because of place names. And this map shows lots of little green dots all across the country. And those dots are towns or villages that have Bal in the place name. And Bala in Gaelic means a town or a village. And so when new towns are formed, people often will have the word Bal in it because it means town. And so this is one of the ways we know that Gaelic used to be spoken all over the country. So what do you think happened that meant that a long time ago, Gaelic was spoken almost everywhere, but now it's mostly spoken in the Western Isles or in small pockets on the mainland and other islands of Scotland? I'm going to give you a minute to discuss this in class, and then when the timer appears on the screen again, I want you to share your answers. So I've got lots of great answers coming in. One class said, Hannic Dunya le Birla, people came with English. And that's true. We've also got that over time people stopped speaking Gaelic. Other languages became more important. I think an interesting question would be, what makes a language important? Because I would say that all languages are important, because all languages are important to different people. They hold different aspects of culture. They have different poetry and songs and traditions. But it is a very good point, because one thing that happened is that Scots became the language of government, and then later English. And that definitely impacted the change of language use across the country. So one thing to note is that some of this language change happened quite slowly. But in much of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, the shift from Gaelic to English happened much more quickly and much more painfully. So one of the things that happened was that English language schools were established across the country, including in the Highlands and Islands where people spoke Gaelic. And so in parts of the country where people spoke Gaelic, it meant that children were going to school and they'd never spoken any English before. And then suddenly, not only were they learning English, but they weren't allowed to speak Gaelic. So for many people, that was quite a scary experience, and it often taught people that Gaelic wasn't as good as English, which obviously isn't true. English and Gaelic are both great languages, but this affected the languages that people speak, even in what are traditionally Gaelic-speaking parts of the country. And this began a few hundred years ago, but actually continued to happen until very recently. So a lot of people in Scotland, sort of our grandparents' age, were made to speak only English in school and were often punished when they tried to speak Gaelic. Another key event that led to Gaelic communities being broken up and then the language suffering was the Highland clearances. So thousands of Gaelic speakers were evicted from their land in what we now call the Highland clearances. For those of you that live in the Highlands or Islands, or if any of you have visited, maybe if you've gone hiking or camping, what you might have seen are lots of old ruins. So in this picture here, you can see that this is the ruin of an old house. And this is evidence of the Highland clearances, when lots of people were made to leave their land, usually because the landowner, could make more money by setting up big sheep farms. So you can see in the picture, sheep still to this day on this piece of land, but the house has become a ruin and the people have left. And unfortunately, similar things have happened to other peoples and cultures across the world, and things like this continue to happen to this day. So it still happens that people aren't able to learn in their community's language at school. And when they go to school, they have to speak English or another big global language. And we still have issues of people being forced off their land. Sometimes it's because certain people or big businesses want to make money from the land and resources that people are living on. And so they try and force them to leave. Another issue is that climate change is making it more difficult to live in certain parts of the world. And that's also creating climate refugees, where people are forced to leave where they used to live because it's becoming unsustainable or dangerous to keep living where they've always lived. And so for these reasons, as well as other factors, it's estimated that an Indigenous language dies every 2 weeks. And that might surprise you, which brings us to the next question. How many languages do you think exist in the world? If you think there are maybe 70 languages across the world, put one hand up. If you think there's more than that, maybe 700 languages globally, put two hands up. And if you think there must be more than that, maybe 7,000 languages, put your hands on your head. And I want teachers to share, what are most people doing? Do most people think there might be 70 languages worldwide? 700 languages? Or maybe 7,000 languages? Okay, everyone's putting their hands on their head. Well, you're right. It's estimated that there are about 7,000 languages in the world. But we actually don't know exactly how many languages are spoken. And this is also changing all the time. Unfortunately, currently languages are often becoming endangered and even extinct. And so the number of languages is declining across the world. I have another question for you. How many languages do you think there are in the country with the most languages? So the country with the most languages in the world, do you think maybe there are 8 different languages? If so, put one hand up. If you think maybe 80 different languages all in one country, put two hands up. Or if you think maybe there's a country out there with over 800 languages, put your hands on your head. And again, I want teachers to share in the chat box what most of the students in their class are doing. So one class thinks maybe one country could have 80 languages. That's a lot of languages, more than Scotland. Okay, lots of people are like 80. One country could have 80 languages. Actually, there's a country with over 800 languages. And that's Papua New Guinea. This is the country with the most living indigenous languages in the world. And the country is the eastern half of this island above Australia, as well as some smaller islands off its coast. And it has a population of about 10 million people. So here in Scotland, our population is about 6 million people, and we have 2 living Indigenous languages. But Papua New Guinea has over 800. And that's an amazing and beautiful thing, because our planet is healthier and more resilient if we have a big diversity of skills, cultures, languages, and ways of understanding the world. But here's how it links to climate change. Unfortunately, climate change affects Indigenous peoples disproportionately. Indigenous people in the world face greater threats from climate change. And those are also the speakers of Indigenous languages. And so climate change is also a threat to Indigenous languages around the world. In Scotland, Gaelic communities are particularly affected by climate change. And you're going to hear more about this from a video in which a girl called Maeve is going to talk about how Uist, the island where she lives, is being affected by climate change. So it's in Gaelic, and there are also English subtitles to help you understand as you watch. So this video is warning us that climate change is putting Uist at risk of flooding. And this is a great threat to Uist Gaelic-speaking communities. And in the video, we hear Maeve say, Hashin a géirí oribh éisteach rain. We want you to listen to us. And it's important that we listen to the people who will be most affected by climate change and that we support them in protecting their communities, whether that's in Uist and other Gaelic-speaking island communities or other parts of the world. Perhaps Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea has been ranked as the 10th most vulnerable country to climate change in the world. And so it's going to need more support and resources in order to protect the people and nature there from climate change. And so we also need to listen to the people of Papua New Guinea, because it's the people that live there that know best what they need to do to protect their lands and their communities. So as people who care about climate change, why should we care about languages? Well, part of it is about respecting people and their cultures. Languages hold within them a whole other way of seeing the world. It holds a community's values, their identity, their history. When a language dies, it's not just words that go out of use, but that culture's history, their songs, their stories, and a whole way of being. And we also need different languages and different ways of knowing in order to tackle climate change. Did you know that people who speak multiple languages are better at problem solving? Studies have shown that if someone is trying to solve a problem and they can think of that problem in another language, they'll see that problem differently and are more likely to come up with a solution. Isn't that amazing? And so climate change is a big problem that we need lots of different perspectives in order to tackle. And that also means we need people from all different cultures, speaking all different languages, to work together to try and find different solutions to the problem. So before I leave you, I want to find out how many different languages we all speak here today. Because it's not only Gaelic that is important when it comes to tackling climate change, but all languages. So if you speak another language, put your hand up and remind your teacher so that they can put it in the chat box. Maybe some of you speak several languages. I want to hear all about them. Or if you're learning a language, let your teacher know so that they can share it in the chat box. Maybe you're all learning a language as a class. Or if anybody uses sign language, let me know. So we've got some French speakers, some Polish speakers. We all speak English. We already know that we've got quite a few Gaelic speakers. I think some people mentioned that they understand some Scots. Does anyone feel that they can also speak Scots? We've got Chinese speakers, Arabic speakers, Turkish speakers, Spanish, German, Dutch, Greek, British Sign Language. So that's amazing, just a few classes, and yet we've got so many different language speakers here. We've got a Thai speaker or some Thai speakers, lots more languages coming in. One class has said they've got 12 different languages represented in their class. So just between the people that came to this lesson today, we've got lots of different cultures, people that have lots of different ways of knowing, ways of tackling problems, that have connections to different parts of the world and different cultures. And that's an amazing and beautiful thing. So I would encourage you to keep speaking all these languages you know. Speak them with your family, with your friends. Find different ways to speak the language, even if it's something that isn't as common in Scotland as English. And for those of you learning Gaelic, keep going. It's a brilliant language. And keep learning in Gaelic, because it's such a wonderful thing that we have Gaelic schools today, because for so long we didn't. So I would just like to say tap alive for coming. And before I send you back to Nicola, can we all try and say tap alive together? So we've all learnt this new phrase today, or some of us already knew it. But let's all say after 3, 1, 2, 3, tap alive. Thank you so much.
Tap alive, Catriona. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And it's really, really wonderful actually to hear about all the amazing languages that are being spoken in classes across Scotland, including Gaelic. So just a wee couple of bits just before you head off. So the recording of this lesson will be available later, but we also have a couple of resources to accompany it if you want to take the learning a little bit further. So one thing that we have created is an action plan that includes some different ideas of what you could do to take the learning further and to keep languages more alive in your classroom. So within the action plan, we've got some ideas about just general keeping languages awareness alive in your classroom. So you could do things about maybe learn about one particular country and their Indigenous peoples and their languages and how that's being affected by things like globalisation and also climate change. Maybe you could have a languages day in your class or in your school to learn about lots of different cultures. And if you want to learn a bit more about Gaelic, for those of you that are learning to speak Gaelic or fluent, or those of you who are brand new to Gaelic, it'd be lovely if you wanted to learn a little bit more about it so you could learn a bit more about the history of Gaelic. We also have a resource called the Gaelic tree alphabet. So if you're particularly interested in nature, the ancient Gaelic language had an alphabet that was associated with trees. So we've got a lovely resource to accompany that. And find out maybe if there's people in your community that speak Gaelic, get to know the language a little bit more. And I'm sure you've all got some wonderful ideas as well of other things that you could do to take this learning further and learn a bit more about how languages are being affected by climate change. So do have a look at our action plan and the Gaelic Tree Alphabet resource. They're in a little resources folder that you should have received a link to when you got the link to this lesson. Also, if you go onto our live lessons page, the recording will be up later and a link to the resources will be there as well. And if you are doing anything around languages and Gaelic and climate action, please say hello on social media and share your work. We always love to hear from you and hear about the amazing things that are happening in classes across Scotland. So you'll find us on all social media platforms at KSB Scotland. And just as our next events that are coming up as well, so we have our Eco Schools Awards. The winners will be announced the week beginning the 6th of May, so keep an eye out for those. We've also got Natural Scotland Week, so that's a whole week of live lessons all about the amazing beauty of Scotland, including some of these amazing places that Catriona was talking about. We have a little mini live lesson talking about heritage on the 3rd of June, which you might be really interested to listen to, as that's talking about more about our cultural heritage. And then a little bit later in June, so the 3rd to the 8th of June, we have our Eco Schools Celebration Week, which will culminate in an assembly on the 8th of June that you can all join in with, and we'll have people represented from lots of different nations, including hopefully Wales and Ireland, so some more Celtic speakers there as well. So please do join us for our celebration assembly as well on the 8th of June. And so thank you so much for joining us. Tapa leif to everybody. And hopefully you can join us for some more lessons soon. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye.